The warden's eyes narrowed as he gazed out at the ravaged landscape. The once lush forests of Drustvar were now a twisted, nightmarish tangle of thorns and vines. The air reeked of damp earth and decay, heavy with the scent of death. His people, the Kul Tiran Wardens, had long protected this land from threats both within and without. Yet, it seemed they had failed to notice the true horror unfolding beneath their watchful eyes. As he dismounted his horse, the warden's gaze fell upon a group of twisted, wicker-like creatures stumbling through the underbrush. Their bodies were crafted from living wood and vines, with eyes that seemed to hold a glimmer of malevolent intelligence. He had seen such abominations before, but never in such numbers. The warden's hand rested on the hilt of his sword as he approached one of the wicker creatures. It reared up on hind legs, its thorny arms grasping for him like skeletal fingers. The creature's eyes seemed to burn with an otherworldly hunger, and the warden knew that if it managed to touch him, its very essence would infect him. As he dispatched the creature with a swift strike, the warden spotted a figure watching from the tree line, a Drust Witch-Doctor. Her dark hair was wild, her eyes flashing with an unnatural light. She stood at the edge of the forest, her long fingers weaving intricate patterns in the air, as if attempting to conjure something from the very shadows themselves. The warden approached her warily, his hand still grasping his sword hilt. "You're the one," he accused, his voice low and even. "I've seen your kind of magic before. You're behind this abomination." The witch-doctor's eyes gleamed with a knowing light as she regarded him calmly. Her gaze was like a cold breeze on a winter night, sending shivers down the warden's spine. "I am no sorcerer," she said, her voice husky and mysterious. "Nor am I behind this blight. But I do know the truth." The warden snorted in derision. "You're as guilty as the next Drust Witch. Your kind has always dabbled in dark magic, but this is beyond anything I've ever seen." The witch-doctor's gaze seemed to bore into his very soul. "Perhaps you should not be so quick to judge," she said, her words dripping with an unspoken menace. As the warden watched, a group of Drust warriors emerged from the tree line, their faces twisted in hatred and fear. They surrounded the witch-doctor, their hands resting on the hilts of their own swords. "You're accused of conjuring these abominations," one of them growled. "You're a menace to our people." The witch-doctor's eyes seemed to flash with a spark of defiance before she spoke in a voice that sent shivers down the warden's spine. "I will not be silenced. The truth must be told." With that, the Drust warriors closed in, their swords raised. The warden knew he had no choice but to intervene, drawing his own sword as the witch-doctor's eyes met his for a fleeting moment. In that instant, he sensed a glimmer of understanding. They were both being hunted by their own people, forced into an alliance against the true enemy lurking in the shadows. The warden drew a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face whatever horrors lay ahead. For in this cursed land, the only way to restore balance was to confront the darkness head-on. As the Drust warriors closed in, their swords raised, the warden knew he had to act fast. With a swift strike, he dispatched two of the attackers, his movements precise and calculated. The witch-doctor, meanwhile, seemed to be channeling some sort of dark energy, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity as she wove a spell that sent several more warriors crashing to the ground. The warden's gaze met hers for a brief moment, and he saw something there that gave him pause. It wasn't just anger or determination, it was a deep sadness, a weariness that seemed to emanate from the very core of her being. In that instant, he knew that she was not the monster they had accused her of being. At least, not entirely. The battle raged on, with the warden and the witch-doctor fighting side by side against their own people. It was a gruesome and brutal fight, with bodies strewn about like rag dolls. The air was thick with the stench of blood and sweat, and the sound of clashing steel filled the air. As they fought, the warden noticed that the witch-doctor seemed to be moving in tandem with the brambles themselves. Her magic seemed to be intertwined with the twisted vines, as if she were using them to amplify her powers. He saw her conjure up walls of thorny growth, blocking the Drust warrior's advance and giving him room to maneuver. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, They managed to clear a path through the chaos. The witch-doctor turned to face him, her eyes still blazing with that unnatural energy. "We must go," she said, her voice low and husky. "We cannot stay here any longer. The brambles are growing stronger by the minute." The warden nodded, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He knew that they had to get out of Drustvar before it was too late, before the very land itself consumed them. As they set off into the treacherous landscape, the warden couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something didn't feel right. The witch-doctor seemed to be leading him deeper and deeper into the heart of the cursed land, further and further from the relative safety of the borders. But what choice did they have? They were both outcasts now, hunted by their own people for reasons they couldn't fully understand. All they could do was press on, hoping to uncover the truth behind the blight that had consumed Drustvar. As they walked, the warden noticed that the brambles seemed to be growing more dense and twisted, as if they were responding to some unseen force. The air grew thick with an almost palpable malevolence, making it hard for him to draw breath. "Where are we going?" he asked the witch-doctor, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look back at him, her gaze fixed on some point ahead. "To the heart of the loom," she said, her voice dripping with an unspoken menace. "There, we will find the source of this blight, and perhaps, just perhaps, find a way to stop it." The warden nodded, his stomach churning with unease. He knew that they were walking into the jaws of hell itself, but he had no choice. They were both outcasts now, forced to navigate the treacherous landscape of Drustvar alone. As they descended deeper into the cursed land, the warden couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. Would they find the source of the blight and be able to stop it? Or would they become just another pair of victims, consumed by the very land that was once their home? Only time would tell, but for now, they had no choice but to press on, into the heart of darkness itself. As they delved deeper into the twisted landscape, the air grew heavier with an unsettling energy. The warden's senses were on high alert, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement or danger. Beside him the witch-doctor walked with an unnerving calm, her gaze fixed on some point ahead as if she knew exactly where they were heading. The warden couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that unblinking eyes were peering out from the very earth itself. He glanced down at the witch-doctor, noticing for the first time that her skin seemed to be taking on a subtle yellow hue, as if she was absorbing some faint luminescence from the twisted vegetation. "Wait," he said, his voice low and urgent. "What's going on with your skin?" The witch-doctor paused, her gaze flicking up to meet his. For an instant, their eyes locked, and the warden felt a shiver run down his spine. It was as if she was seeing right through him, piercing the very fabric of his being. "It's just the land," she said, her voice like a gentle breeze on a summer's day. "It's talking to me." The warden's grip on his sword tightened. He didn't know what kind of dark magic this witch-doctor was wielding, but he knew they had to be careful. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. The witch-doctor shrugged, her eyes drifting back to the horizon. "I can feel its presence. The land is remembering, and it's not happy." As she spoke, the air seemed to thicken around them, the brambles twisting and writhing like living serpents. The warden felt a creeping sense of dread as he realized that they were indeed walking into some kind of ancient, malevolent power. "You're saying this land is alive?" he asked, his voice laced with incredulity. The witch-doctor's gaze snapped back to him, her eyes glinting like polished obsidian. "Not just alive," she said, her voice dripping with an unholy enthusiasm. "It's a conduit, a gateway." The warden's grip on his sword tightened further. He knew that they were walking into something big, something that could potentially unravel the very fabric of reality. "What kind of gateway?" he asked, his tone laced with caution. But the witch-doctor just smiled, her eyes glinting like stars in a midnight sky. "That's what we're going to find out," she said, her voice dripping with an otherworldly glee. As they pressed on into the heart of the cursed land, the warden couldn't help but wonder what kind of horrors lay ahead. Would they be able to stop the blight, or would they become just another pair of victims, consumed by the very land that was once their home? He glanced down at the witch-doctor, her eyes fixed on some distant point ahead. He knew that she was hiding something, but what? And how much longer could he trust her before he realized that she was leading him straight into the jaws of hell itself? The air grew colder, the brambles twisting and writhing like living serpents as they descended further into the depths of Drustvar. The warden knew that they were walking into something big, something that could potentially unravel the very fabric of reality. And yet he couldn't help but feel a morbid fascination with the darkness ahead. A part of him knew that they had to stop the blight, no matter what horrors lay in store. As they delved deeper into the heart of Drustvar, the air grew thick with an otherworldly presence. The warden's hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of his sword, the worn leather creaking in protest. Beside him, the witch-doctor moved with an eerie quiet, her eyes fixed on some distant point ahead. The brambles seemed to writhe and twist around them, their thorny tendrils reaching out like grasping fingers. The warden's skin crawled at the sensation, as if the very land itself was trying to ensnare them. He glanced down at the witch-doctor, her eyes still fixed on some unseen horizon. "What's ahead?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "What kind of horrors are we walking into?" The witch-doctor's gaze never wavered, but a faint smile played on her lips. "We're getting close," she said, her voice like the gentle lapping of a dark lake against its shores. "Close to the heart of it all." The warden's grip on his sword tightened further as they continued down the twisted path. The air grew colder still, the darkness seeming to seep into their very bones. Suddenly the witch-doctor halted, her eyes fixed on some point ahead. The warden followed her gaze, his own eyes widening in shock. Before them lay a massive, ancient loom, its wooden frame covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of their own. The threads that passed through its warp and weft appeared to be alive, writhing like snakes as they danced across the fabric. "This is it," the witch-doctor breathed, her voice barely audible over the soft hiss of the threads. "This is where it all began." The warden's eyes remained fixed on the loom, his mind reeling with the implications. This was no mere mortal contraption. It was a gateway to some other realm, a portal to the very depths of madness and despair. "You're not going to let me stop you from finding out what's behind this, are you?" he asked, his voice heavy with dread. The witch-doctor's smile grew wider, her eyes glinting like cold stars. "Oh no," she said, her voice dripping with an unholy excitement. "We're just getting started." Without another word, the witch-doctor reached out and grasped one of the writhing threads. The warden watched in horror as she began to weave it into the fabric of the loom, the symbols pulsating brighter as she worked. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his sword trembling with rage. The witch-doctor's eyes never left the thread. Her face twisted into a grotesque grin. "We're closing the circle," she said, her voice like the creaking of ancient trees. "We're bringing the past and present together." As she spoke, the threads seemed to grow stronger, their pulsations increasing in intensity as they began to coalesce into some sort of dark, twisted form. The warden's grip on his sword tightened further, his mind reeling with the implications. He knew that he had to stop her, but a part of him was trapped in the darkness, drawn to the secrets that lay hidden behind the ancient loom. And as they stood there, frozen in terror and fascination, the threads began to take shape, forming into some sort of twisted, nightmarish creature. The warden knew that he had to act, but his sword seemed heavy with reluctance, as if it too was drawn to the darkness ahead. The witch-doctor's eyes gleamed with an unholy light as she gazed upon the creature taking form before them. "Ah," she breathed, her voice like a sigh of satisfaction. "The threads are aligning." As the creature took its first stumbling steps forward, the warden knew that he had to act. But his sword seemed rooted to the spot, as if it too was entranced by the dark magic unfolding before them. And in that moment, the witch-doctor's eyes locked onto his, her gaze burning with an otherworldly intensity. The warden felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that she had been waiting for him all along, waiting for him to join her in this twisted dance of darkness and despair. The air was thick with tension as the warden's sword hesitated, poised on the cusp of striking down the abomination before them. The witch-doctor's eyes never left his, her gaze a cold, calculating force that seemed to be drawing him in. The threads of darkness pulsed with an otherworldly energy, as if feeding off their mutual fascination. "You should not have come here," she whispered, her voice like a winter breeze off the frozen tundra. The warden's grip on his sword tightened further, his mind racing with the implications of what they were facing. The creature before them was no mere monster. It was a physical manifestation of the darkness that lurked at the very heart of Drustvar. And yet, he couldn't help but feel drawn to its twisted beauty, as if the threads of fate had somehow entwined their destinies. The witch-doctor's laughter was like a rusty gate creaking in the wind, sending shivers down his spine. "You're trying to resist the power of the loom," she said, her eyes glinting with malevolent intent. "But you'll find that it's not just the threads that are binding, it's your own curiosity, your own darkness." As if sensing his hesitation, the creature took another step forward, its twisted form seeming to grow more defined with each passing moment. The warden felt a creeping sense of dread as he realized that they were walking into a trap, one that would only lead to further corruption and despair. But it was too late. The threads had already begun to bind him, drawing him in with an irresistible force. He felt his sword slipping from his grasp, his mind clouding over with the darkness that lurked within. The witch-doctor's eyes seemed to be pulling him down into an abyss of madness and despair. The creature loomed before them, its twisted form seeming to grow more imposing by the moment. The warden felt himself being drawn into its dark, nightmarish realm, a place where the very fabric of reality was warped and distorted beyond recognition. And yet, even as he fell under the creature's influence, he knew that he had to resist. The witch-doctor's laughter seemed to grow louder, more maniacal, as she watched him succumb to the power of the loom. But deep within his mind, a spark of defiance still flickered, a flame of hope that refused to be extinguished. The warden's eyes locked onto the creature, his gaze burning with a determination he didn't know he possessed. He felt the threads binding him begin to loosen, as if the very fabric of reality was starting to unravel once more. The witch-doctor's laughter faltered, her eyes narrowing in surprise as she realized that her victim had finally found the strength to resist. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled rage, the warden charged forward, his sword flashing in the dim light, its blade slicing through the threads of darkness like a beacon of hope. The creature let out a deafening scream as it stumbled backward, its twisted form beginning to unravel before their very eyes. The witch-doctor's laughter ceased, replaced by a look of pure rage and betrayal. "You fool!" she spat, her eyes blazing with a malevolent fury. "You think you can defeat the power of the loom? You'll only find yourself consumed, forever trapped in this twisted dance of darkness and despair." The warden didn't hesitate. He knew that he had to act fast before the witch-doctor regained control. With a burst of strength, he plunged his sword into the heart of the creature, feeling its dark energy begin to dissipate as the threads binding it began to unravel. As the last vestiges of the creature's form dissipated, the warden felt himself being pulled back into reality, the threads of darkness receding like a tide going out. The witch-doctor's eyes seemed to burn with an otherworldly intensity, her gaze fixed on him with a malevolent intent that sent shivers down his spine. "You may have won this battle," she whispered, her voice like a winter breeze off the frozen tundra. "But the war is far from over. The threads of fate are still binding, and you're just beginning to realize what's at stake." Warden stood tall, his chest heaving with exhaustion as he gazed upon the witch-doctor's twisted form. The air was heavy with the stench of decay and corruption, and yet, amidst the rot and ruin, a glimmer of hope still flickered within him. "You're right," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil that churned beneath the surface. "I don't know what I'm up against, but I will not back down." The witch-doctor's gaze never wavered, her eyes burning with an intensity that made the warden's skin crawl. She took a step closer, her movements fluid and unhurried, as if she were a creature born of darkness itself. "You're playing with forces beyond your comprehension," she warned, her voice dripping with malevolent intent. The loom is not to be trifled with. It is an ancient power, one that has shaped the very fabric of reality. The warden's grip on his sword tightened, his mind racing with the implications. He had faced many foes in his battles against the Burning Legion, but nothing could have prepared him for the horrors that lurked within the heart of Drustvar. "What do you propose we do?" he asked, his voice firm despite the doubts that crept into his mind. The witch-doctor's smile was a thing of beauty and terror, a masterpiece of dark magic. "We must delve deeper into the loom," she said, her eyes glinting with an otherworldly light. "Unravel the threads of fate that bind us to this cursed land." As she spoke, the air around them seemed to thicken, as if the very fabric of reality was bending to accommodate their conversation. The warden felt a creeping sense of dread as he realized that they were not alone in the loom. Shapes began to take form around them, twisted, nightmarish creations born from the threads of darkness and despair. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their eyes glowing like embers from the depths of the underworld. The witch-doctor's laughter echoed through the loom, a sound that sent shivers down the warden's spine. "Ah, yes," she whispered. "The other inhabitants of this realm are eager to meet us." With a surge of adrenaline-fueled rage, the warden charged forward, his sword flashing in the dim light, its blade slicing through the threads of darkness like a beacon of hope. The creatures let out a chorus of unearthly screams as they stumbled backward, their twisted forms beginning to unravel before their very eyes. The witch-doctor's laughter ceased, replaced by a look of pure rage and betrayal. "You fool!" she spat, her eyes blazing with a malevolent fury. "You think you can defeat the power of the loom? You'll only find yourself consumed forever, trapped in this twisted dance of darkness and despair." As the last vestiges of the creature's forms dissipated, the warden felt himself being pulled back into reality, the threads of darkness receding like a tide going out. The witch-doctor's eyes seemed to burn with an otherworldly intensity, her gaze fixed on him with a malevolent intent that sent shivers down his spine. "You may have won this battle," she whispered, her voice like a winter breeze off the frozen tundra, "but the war is far from over. The threads of fate are still binding, and you're just beginning to realize what's at stake." As he stood there, bathed in the faint glow of the loom, the warden knew that he had to find a way to sever the connection between Drustvar and the ancient entity lurking beyond the veil of reality. The witch-doctor's words echoed in his mind like a death knell. The threads of fate were binding them to this cursed land, and they would have to confront the being that was once banished by the Drust themselves. With a deep breath, the warden steeled himself for the challenges ahead. He knew that he had to be prepared to face whatever horrors lay in store, and that the only way to sever the connection was to delve deeper into the heart of the loom. The warden's boots scuffed against the dusty floor as he ventured deeper into the ancient loom. The air grew thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. Every step seemed to echo through the cavernous space, a reminder that he was not alone in this forsaken place. As he delved deeper, the threads of fate began to weave themselves around him, whispering dark truths and foreboding warnings. The warden's hand instinctively reached for the hilt of his sword, his grip tightening as the shadows seemed to coalesce into malevolent entities that watched him with cold calculation. Ahead, a faint glow illuminated the walls, casting an eerie light on the ancient machinery. The warden's eyes narrowed as he recognized the symbol etched into the stone, the mark of the Drust, the people who had once wielded this power. Now, it seemed, they were its prisoners. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form indistinct and twisted, like a living embodiment of the cursed loom. The warden's sword hand twitched with anticipation as the being drew closer, its features resolving into those of an ancient Drust sorceress. Her eyes burned with a fire that seemed to melt the very air around her, her voice like a rusty gate creaking in the wind. "You should not have come here," she hissed, her words dripping with venom. "The loom is not for mortals. You will only bring destruction upon yourself." The warden stood firm, his gaze locked onto the sorceress as he drew his sword. The blade seemed to hum with a power that was both ancient and forgotten, its edge glinting like a shard of starlight in the dim light. "You are not the one I seek," the warden said, his voice steady despite the growing sense of unease. "I am here for the entity that lurks beyond this veil, the one who seeks to tear apart the fabric of reality." The sorceress' laughter was like a rusty gate creaking in the wind, her eyes flashing with a malevolent intensity. "You think you can defeat the power of the loom? You will only find yourself consumed, forever trapped in this twisted dance of darkness and despair." As she spoke, the threads of fate began to writhe and twist around her, like living serpents that wrapped themselves around her form. The warden's sword hand flexed with anticipation as he prepared to strike. But something about the sorceress' words struck a chord within him, a sense of desperation, of hopelessness. He recalled the witch-doctor's warning, "You will only find yourself consumed, forever trapped in this twisted dance of darkness and despair." With a sudden clarity, the warden understood that he was not here to defeat the sorceress or the entity. He was here to sever the connection between Drustvar and the ancient being, to cut the threads of fate that bound them to this cursed land. As he raised his sword, the warden felt a surge of power course through him, like the hum of the loom itself. The blade seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly intensity, its edge glinting like a shard of starlight in the dim light. "I will not be consumed," the warden said, his voice steady and resolute. "I will sever the connection and free this land from your grasp." The sorceress' eyes flashed with rage as she raised her own hands, the threads of fate writhing around her like living serpents. The warden steeled himself for the battle ahead, his sword at the ready to cut the very fabric of reality itself. As the warden's blade sliced through the air, the sorceress unleashed a torrent of magic, the threads of fate writhing around her like living serpents. The warden parried each strike with ease, his sword humming with an otherworldly intensity as he danced across the ancient loom. The fabric of reality seemed to vibrate in harmony with their movements, the very essence of life and death woven into the tapestry. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood as the battle raged on. The warden's armor gleamed dully in the dim light, his eyes fixed intently on the sorceress. Her gaze burned with a fierce intensity, her dark hair whipping wildly around her face like a madwoman's locks. With each strike, the threads of fate seemed to tighten their grip, as if sensing the warden's determination to sever the connection between Drustvar and the ancient being. The sorceress cackled maniacally, her eyes flashing with malevolent glee as she wove the very fabric of reality into a tapestry of darkness. "You're no match for me, warden," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "I have the power of the loom on my side, and it will consume you, body and soul." The warden's response was swift and deadly. With a flick of his wrist, he sent his sword slicing through the threads of fate, severing the connection between Drustvar and the ancient being. The fabric of reality seemed to tear asunder, releasing a torrent of dark energy that washed over the sorceress like a wave. The loom itself began to writhe and twist, its wooden frame groaning in agony as the very essence of life and death was torn from its grasp. The warden stood tall, his sword still humming with power as he surveyed the aftermath of the battle. The sorceress lay at his feet, her eyes vacant and lifeless as she stared up at him. The threads of fate had lost their hold on her, releasing her from the curse that had consumed her for so long. As the warden watched, a faint glimmer of recognition flickered in her gaze before she slumped still. With a heavy heart, the warden knelt beside the sorceress and gently closed her eyes. He knew that she was no longer the same person who had once wielded such power, not since the curse had taken hold of her. The darkness had consumed her, leaving behind only a shell of her former self. As he stood up, the warden felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to heal itself, the threads of fate slowly weaving themselves back into their original pattern. Drustvar's land began to stir once more, its ancient magic awakening from its slumber like a restless beast. The warden knew that he had to leave, and quickly. The consequences of his actions would be far-reaching, and he could not stay in this cursed land any longer. With a heavy heart, he turned away from the sorceress's lifeless form and vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only a faint whisper on the wind. "I will not forget," he whispered to himself. "I will make sure that the darkness is banished once more, and that no one else falls prey to its grasp." Warden emerged from the shadows, his gaze scanning the desolate landscape before him. The air was heavy with the weight of ancient magic, and he could feel the land's pulse beating in time with his own. Drustvar lay before him, its twisted brambles reaching out like skeletal fingers to ensnare anyone who dared to venture too close. As he walked, the warden felt a strange affinity for this cursed land. It was as if the very earth itself had claimed him as its own, and that he could sense the secrets hidden within its ancient heart. The farther he ventured from the sorceress' lifeless form, the more he became attuned to the land's rhythms. The wind whispered secrets in his ear, carrying the whispers of the Drust Witch-Doctor on its breath. He knew that she was out there, somewhere, watching him with calculating eyes. She had her own agenda, and the warden suspected that it did not bode well for him or the land he now called home. As he crested a hill, the warden beheld a sight that made his blood run cold. The brambles seemed to be coalescing into a twisted, nightmarish form, their thorny tendrils reaching out like grasping hands. He knew that this was no mere growth. It was something far more sinister. "Ancient One, I sense your presence," the warden whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind's mournful sighs. "You who were once banished from this land now seek to reclaim it as your own. But you will not find me so easily defeated." The brambles seemed to stir at his words, their twisted forms undulating like living serpents. The warden knew that he had to confront this ancient entity, to sever the connection that bound it to Azeroth's fabric. With a deep breath, he drew his sword, its power coursing through him like lifeblood. The wind howled in response, as if the very land itself was warning him of the dangers ahead. Undaunted, the warden plunged forward into the heart of the ancient loom. As he descended into the primordial depths, the warden felt reality's fabric begin to unravel around him. Time and space grew distorted, like ripples on a pond disturbed by a thrown stone. He knew that he was walking in the shadow of an event that would reshape the very course of history. A faint glow illuminated the darkness ahead, the threads of fate, still entwined with the Ancient One's essence. The warden steeled himself for the confrontation ahead, his sword shining like a beacon against the encroaching darkness. "What lies at the heart of Drustvar?" he whispered to the wind, his voice carrying on its breath. The land itself seemed to shudder in response, as if it was awakening from a long, tortured slumber. The warden knew that he had reached the threshold, and that only one way lay before him: forward, into the very heart of the ancient loom. With a deep breath, he stepped across the threshold, ready to face whatever horrors lay within. The darkness awaited, its grip tightening around Azeroth's fabric like a noose drawing ever tighter. The warden's sword sliced through the air, casting flickering shadows on the ancient loom's walls. Before him, the threads of fate glowed with an otherworldly light, as if beckoning him deeper into the heart of Drustvar. The wind howled in protest, its mournful wails echoing off the stone floor like the lamentations of the damned. As he descended further, the air grew thick with the stench of decay and corruption. The warden's nostrils flared, his stomach churning with a mix of revulsion and determination. He knew that he was drawing close to the ancient entity, and the darkness that lurked within. The threads of fate seemed to writhe like living serpents, twisting and turning in impossible ways. The warden followed their path, his eyes fixed on the pulsing core at the heart of the loom. With each step, reality's fabric grew more tattered, the veil between worlds thinning to almost nothing. Suddenly, the threads coalesced into a shape, a twisted form that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. The warden recognized it: the Ancient One, the being that had been banished by the Drust so many years ago. Its presence was like a cold wind, seeping into his very marrow and chilling his bones. "You should not have come here," the entity hissed, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "You will join your friends in the darkness." The warden steeled himself against the entity's words, his grip on his sword tightening. He knew that he had to sever the connection between Drustvar and Azeroth, no matter the cost. "I've come to stop you," he said, his voice steady despite the creeping sense of dread. "You will not return to this world." The Ancient One chuckled, a sound like the creaking of old wooden beams. "You are foolish, Warden," it said. "I have been awakened, and nothing can stop me now. The land itself is my anchor, and I will use it to tear asunder the very fabric of reality." The Warden charged forward, his sword flashing in the dim light. The entity was too powerful, however, and it easily deflected each blow. As they clashed, the threads of fate began to unravel, reality's fabric growing increasingly frayed. Just when all seemed lost, a faint glow appeared on the periphery of the Warden's vision, the Drust Witch-Doctor, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly energy. She was drawn to the Ancient One's power, her own essence resonating with the entity's dark magic. The Warden took advantage of the distraction, striking at the entity with renewed force. The Witch-Doctor joined him, their combined might finally managing to sever the connection between Drustvar and Azeroth. As reality's fabric snapped back into place, the Ancient One let out a deafening scream, its essence dissipating like mist in the morning sun. The threads of fate coiled around the Warden, binding him to the land and the secrets it held. The Witch-Doctor approached him, her eyes burning with an unholy intensity. "We have stopped the Ancient One," she said, her voice dripping with malevolence. "But at what cost?" The Warden looked down at his bound hands, a sense of dread growing within him. He knew that he had unleashed a power beyond his comprehension, and that the consequences would be dire. "What have we done?" he whispered, the wind howling in response like a chorus of lost souls. The Warden's eyes scanned the desolate landscape, the weight of their actions settling upon him like a shroud. The Witch-Doctor's words still lingered in his mind, echoing with an ominous warning. He had stopped the Ancient One, but at what cost? As he looked down at his bound hands, a cold dread crept up his spine. The threads of fate that now entwined him seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if they were alive and feeding off his own life force. He knew that he had unleashed a power beyond his comprehension, and that the consequences would be dire. The Witch-Doctor's gaze remained fixed on him, her eyes burning with an unholy intensity. Her very presence seemed to draw the light out of the air, leaving only an unsettling darkness in its wake. The Warden felt himself being pulled towards her, as if by some unseen force, and he knew that he had to resist. "You must understand," she whispered, her voice like a rusty gate creaking in the wind, "that the Ancient One was not just any entity. It was a guardian, a keeper of secrets and wielder of dark power. By stopping it, we have unleashed a force that will not be easily contained." The Warden's grip on his sword tightened as he gazed upon her. He could feel the weight of his duty bearing down upon him, but he knew that he had to tread carefully. The Witch-Doctor was not what she seemed, and he sensed that she was hiding something. "What secrets?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "What power?" The Witch-Doctor's smile was like a crack in the earth, a fissure that seemed to split open and reveal a dark chasm beneath. "The secrets of Drustvar," she whispered, her breath cold and rank, "and the power of the loom." As she spoke, the threads of fate that bound him seemed to writhe and twist like living serpents. The Warden felt himself being drawn closer to her, as if by some unseen force, and he knew that he had to resist. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice laced with a growing unease. The Witch-Doctor's eyes seemed to burn brighter, her gaze piercing like a shard of ice. "The loom," she whispered, her voice like a sighing wind. "It is not just a simple tool for weaving fabric. It is a gateway, a portal to the very fabric of reality itself." As she spoke, the Warden felt himself being pulled closer to the Witch-Doctor, as if by some unseen force. He knew that he had to resist, but his own sense of duty and responsibility seemed to be pulling him towards her. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Witch-Doctor's smile grew wider, her eyes blazing with an unholy intensity. "I want you to join me," she whispered, her breath cold and rank. to help me unravel the threads of fate that bind us all." As she spoke, the warden felt himself being drawn closer to her, as if by some unseen force. He knew that he had to resist, but his own sense of duty and responsibility seemed to be pulling him towards her. And so he found himself bound to the Witch-Doctor's will, a pawn in a game of dark magic and ancient power. The threads of fate that entwined him seemed to writhe and twist like living serpents, drawing him deeper into the heart of darkness. The warden's boots crunched on the dry earth as he followed the Witch-Doctor through the twisted, gnarled trees of Drustvar. The air was heavy with the scent of damp soil and decaying leaves, and the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the soft rustling of the brambles. "I don't understand," the warden said, his voice low and even. "Why do you want me to join you? What's at stake?" The Witch-Doctor's eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, her gaze piercing as she replied, "You have a role to play in this, Warden. You see, I am not just any Drust Witch-Doctor. I am the last of my line, the keeper of ancient secrets and forbidden knowledge." The warden's grip on his spear tightened, his instincts warning him away from her words. But he couldn't help feeling drawn to her, as if by some unseen force. "What do you mean?" he asked again, his voice a little sharper this time. "I mean that the brambles are not just growing," she said, her voice low and husky. "They are remembering the Ancient One who was once banished from our world. The one who seeks to tear its way back into Azeroth using Drustvar as its anchor." The warden's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with the implications. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," she replied, her eyes glinting like ice in the fading light. "You see, Warden, you are not just any Kul Tiran Warden. You are a key player in this game of fate and destiny." The warden's grip on his spear tightened further, his instincts screaming at him to get away from her words. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice cold and detached. The Witch-Doctor's smile grew wider, her eyes burning with an unholy intensity. "You need to help me unravel the threads of fate that bind us all," she whispered, her breath cold and rank. "Together we can stop the Ancient One from returning." The warden felt a shiver run down his spine as he looked at her. He knew that he was being pulled deeper into her web of deceit and dark magic. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. The Witch-Doctor's eyes seemed to flash with anger, but she just laughed, the sound like a cold wind blowing through the trees. "You won't have a choice," she whispered, her breath hot against his ear. "Fate has other plans for you, Warden." And with that, she vanished into the shadows, leaving the warden to ponder her words and the twisted, gnarled fate that bound him to hers. Warden trudged through the underbrush, his spear at the ready as he navigated the treacherous terrain of Drustvar. The air was heavy with the stench of decaying vegetation and the sickly sweet aroma of blooming brambles. He could feel their presence all around him, like a palpable force that seemed to seep into his very pores. As he walked, the warden's thoughts turned to the Witch-Doctor. Her words still lingered in his mind, echoing with an unsettling cadence. "Fate has other plans for you, Warden," he snorted to himself, scoffing at the idea that some ancient, mystical force could dictate his actions. Yet a nagging sense of unease persisted, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to unravel around him. The Witch-Doctor's parting words had left him with more questions than answers. What did she mean by unraveling the threads of fate? And what role did he truly play in this twisted game of destiny? The warden shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs from his mind. He was a simple man, driven by duty and honor, not some mystical prophecy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Drustvar in an eerie twilight, the warden caught sight of a figure standing atop a mound of twisted brambles. Her eyes gleamed like lanterns in the darkness, drawing him inexorably towards her. The Witch-Doctor's gaze locked onto his, and he felt a shiver run down his spine as she beckoned him closer. "Ah, Warden," she said, her voice dripping with an otherworldly allure. "I see you're still grappling with the weight of fate." He approached her cautiously, his spear at the ready, in case things turned sour. The witch-doctor's smile seemed to grow more radiant as he drew near, her eyes burning with an intensity that bordered on madness. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice low and husky. "Perhaps we should pay a visit to the ancient loom. There, you can see for yourself the tapestry of fate that binds us all." The warden's instinct screamed at him to turn back, but his curiosity got the better of him. He nodded curtly, and together they descended into the heart of Drustvar. As they walked, the air grew thick with an unnatural silence. The only sound was the soft rustling of brambles as they moved through the underbrush. The warden felt like they were being watched by unseen eyes, their every step monitored by some malevolent force that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. The witch-doctor led him deeper into the heart of Drustvar, until they reached a clearing surrounded by towering, twisted trees. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient loom, its wooden frame covered in vines and moss. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay as the warden approached. The witch-doctor's eyes seemed to bore into his very soul as she reached out to touch the loom. "Behold," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. "The fabric of life and death, woven by the ancient ones themselves." As he looked upon the loom, the warden felt a creeping sense of dread. The threads of fate that bound them all seemed to pulse with a dark, malevolent energy, as if some ancient power was stirring from its slumber. "You see, Warden," the witch-doctor whispered, her breath cold against his ear. "Fate has indeed woven a tapestry that binds us all, and you are a crucial thread in this grand design." The warden's grip on his spear tightened as he realized the true extent of their predicament. They were mere puppets, dancing to the tune of some ancient, vengeful force that sought to tear its way back into Azeroth. He knew then that they had to stop the witch-doctor, to sever the threads of fate that bound them all. But as he turned to face her, he saw only a cold, calculating smile, and an eyes that burned with an unholy intensity. "You're too late," she whispered, her voice like a winter's breeze. "The Ancient One is already awakening, and we are but mere pawns in its game of fate and destiny." As the warden watched in horror, the witch-doctor vanished into the shadows, leaving him to face the darkness that lurked at the heart of Drustvar alone.